What if one morning you awoke to find the sun was no longer itself? Not extinguished, not hidden, but pale, weak, reduced to a shadow of its former brilliance. Imagine looking to the sky and seeing the great fire that has burned since before the dawn of humankind turned into something muted, as though the heavens had drawn a veil across its face. Not for an hour, not for a single eclipse, but for a year and a half. 18 long months in which the source of all life was diminished. What story would you tell yourself then? Would you see the hand of God, punishment and wrath written in the dim sky? Would you whisper of demons and dragons swallowing the sun? Or would you feel something deeper, an unshakable terror that the universe itself had shifted against you? This is not a thought experiment. It is history. In the year 536, the Earth sank into one of the strangest and most catastrophic episodes ever recorded by human eyes. Chronicles written across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia all speak of the same phenomenon. The sun dimmed, the days grew colder, and the world seemed to stagger. The Byzantine historian Procopius wrote of a sun that gave forth its light without brightness like the moon during the whole year. Irish annals spoke of a failure of bread. Chinese records told of yellow dust and dim skies. This was no local disaster. It was global, indiscriminate, and inescapable. The darkness was not absolute. The sun was still there, but weaker, its power muted. Crops failed in the fields as if the very promise of summer had been broken. Famine spread its roots into cities and villages alike, leaving behind skeletal children and graves dug too shallow. In every direction, civilizations faltered. The Byzantines stumbled through war and plague. The Sassanid Persians found their strength diminished. In Mesoamerica, cities like Teotihuacan began to unravel. Something had shaken the balance of the world, and for a time it seemed as though humanity stood at the edge of extinction. But what was it? The conventional answer points to volcanoes. Scientists have drilled into ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica, finding traces of vast eruptions around this time, cataclysms that may have thrown enough ash into the stratosphere to veil the world in gloom. Yet even with this evidence, doubts remain. The records of 536 describe not just a dimming, but a strange, persistent pall that outlasted the blasts of ordinary volcanoes. Something else may have been at work, a veil not of our own making. Could the skies have been darkened not by Earth itself, but by something passing close, something alien, something from beyond the cradle of our solar system? Consider this possibility: an interstellar traveler, a comet not bound to our sun, not native to our sky, but wandering from the abyss between stars. Today we have given names to such visitors: Oumuamua, Borisov, 3I/Atlas. They arrive unannounced, move with alien trajectories, and then vanish back into the dark. They do not belong here, and yet they cross paths with Earth, brushing our world with their dust, their gravity, their mystery. If we have witnessed them in our time, why not in the past? Why not in 536? Imagine such a visitor, vast in its coma of dust and ice, brushing close to Earth. Imagine the trails of fine particles, so delicate yet so numerous, spreading through our atmosphere and dimming the light of the sun. Imagine the panic of people looking skyward at a sky they no longer recognized. Would they not write of dragons, of veiled suns, of divine punishment? A civilization without telescopes would have seen only a sky that turned strange, and from it they would draw omens of doom. To live in that moment must have felt like existing at the end of all things. The rhythm of seasons shattered, winters colder, summers failing to warm, livestock dying in their pens, hunger gnawing at every stomach, villages abandoned, empires weakened, and in the shadows of famine came the plague, sweeping through weakened populations, as if Earth itself had turned hostile. Death became not an event, but a season that stretched on and on. What do we do when the heavens themselves seem to betray us? We tell stories. In the wake of the darkness of 536, mythologies grew teeth. Legends of sun-eating monsters spread. Prophets warned of apocalyptic judgments. Even centuries later, echoes of this event lived on in folklore, distorted but not erased. It is as if the memory of the sky's betrayal was too great to forget, too strange to explain, And so it was folded into religion, into poetry, into the very bones of culture. But beneath the stories lies a question that has never gone away. Was the year 536 simply a product of Earth's own fury? Or did something greater move through our skies? Was it a volcano in Iceland? Or was it the silent passage of a cosmic wanderer whose dust dimmed the world? Did humanity, without knowing it, stand in the shadow of an interstellar visitor? Our modern age has glimpsed such travelers. Oumuamua arrived in 2017, tumbling end over end, accelerating in ways we could not fully explain. Then came Borisov in 2019, a comet from deep space, trailing its gases like a glowing wound across the sky. And then 3/Atlas, yet another stranger slipping through our solar system, carrying secrets from regions of the galaxy we may never see. Each one came and went, leaving behind more questions than answers. To imagine that one of their kin passed Earth 15 centuries ago is not so far-fetched. The cosmos is not a clockwork of predictability. It is an ocean of drift, a wilderness where wanderers appear and vanish. Our planet is but a speck on their path. And when such a traveler draws near, it does not need to strike Earth to change our fate. A passing cloud of dust, a veil cast over the atmosphere, can be enough to reshape history, enough to unmake empires, to starve nations, to carve scars into the story of humanity. So we return to that haunting question. What if the year 536 was not just a volcanic shadow, but a moment when Earth brushed against the trail of a visitor from beyond the stars? What if the myths of veiled suns, of devouring dragons, of apocalyptic darkness, are echoes of something real, something cosmic, something forgotten? The story of 536 is not merely about hunger and cold. It is about fragility. It is about the truth that the world we know rests upon forces we do not control. The sun rises each day, and we build our lives upon its light. But in that year, humanity learned how easily that promise could fail. A change in the sky, and the fabric of society unraveled. A shift in the heavens, and the world as they knew it collapsed. We are drawn to these stories not because they are distant curiosities, but because they remind us of the thin line we walk. We live under a sky full of wanderers, some known, some hidden. We study them now with telescopes, with equations, with spacecraft. But deep inside, we remain the same creatures who once stood in the fields of 536, staring upward in fear, asking why the sun had grown weak. We are still searching for answers. And so, this documentary begins here, in that haunting year. A year when the sun betrayed its children. A year when myth and science, despair and survival, all converged. A year when the question was whispered for the first time. What came close to Earth? Was it ash? Was it dust? Was it a forgotten visitor from the depths of space? The silence of history offers no easy reply. But if we listen closely, to the chronicles, to the myths, to the ice beneath our feet and the dust between the stars, we may begin to sense an answer. A truth that is not only about the past, but about our future. Because if the visitor came once, it can come again. And if it does, will we recognize it this time? Or will we once again look to the sky in fear and find that the sun has grown pale? The year 536 did not end when the sun dimmed. Its echoes traveled further, deeper, bleeding not only into the sky, but into flesh, into bone, into the very structure of human life. Hunger has a way of engraving itself on the body, hollowing cheeks, bending backs, leaving behind skeletons that speak without words. Archaeology uncovers them centuries later, and even now the bones whisper of suffering that stretched across continents. These were not isolated tragedies. They were a symphony of despair, written in every rib, every tooth, every grave dug shallow because the living had no strength left to dig deeper. When we look at history, we tend to name kings, battles, and empires. But here, the true chroniclers were not scribes with ink, but children whose growth was stunted, families who starved together, villages that disappeared without a trace. In the chronicles of famine, the mighty are forgotten, and it is the silence of the ordinary that speaks loudest. In Ireland, records told of a failure of bread that lasted years. In China, the chronicles described yellow dust in the skies, crops that refused to ripen, hunger that spread like a slow fire. In the Middle East, chroniclers wrote of darkened skies and empty markets. The world seemed to collapse into itself. Science has allowed us to return to these stories not as distant legends, but as tangible realities. Ice cores drilled from Greenland and Antarctica preserve microscopic ash from ancient eruptions. Tree rings show us how the summers of 536 and the years after were among the coldest in recorded history. Growth halted, rings narrowed, forests paused in their expansion as if the earth itself recoiled. In Europe, skeletal remains bear lines etched into enamel, marks left by malnutrition during childhood. In South America, we find evidence of societal shifts, migrations driven by famine. The catastrophe was not local, nor fleeting. It was global. It was prolonged. It was inescapable. But was it only the Earth's fire at work? The prevailing theory speaks of volcanoes, eruptions in Iceland, or perhaps the tropics, immense enough to throw veils of ash into the stratosphere. This veil would have circled the globe, scattering sunlight, chilling the surface, and bringing famine in its wake. It is a compelling story, supported by evidence. Yet, something about it remains incomplete. The human testimony tells of a sun not merely hidden, but transformed, weakened, ghost-like. Could ash alone mimic such a transformation for nearly 2 years? Or was there something else? Imagine dust, not of Earth, but of space. Imagine a cloud of particles trailing from a vast interstellar body, drifting into our atmosphere, scattering sunlight with a subtlety no volcanic ash could match. A veil drawn not by mountains, but by a visitor from beyond. To ancient eyes, the effect would be the same, a sky that no longer obeyed its own rules. But to us, centuries later, the possibility raises unsettling questions. Did humanity's suffering record the passing breath of an interstellar wanderer? It is tempting to dismiss such speculation as fantasy. And yet, our own time has taught us how real these visitors can be. Oumuamua slipped through our solar system in 2017, its trajectory marking it as an exile from another star. Borisov followed in 2019, a comet carrying alien ices, a body that formed light years away. 3I/Atlas 2 brushed past, reminding us that interstellar wanderers are not myths, but inevitabilities. These objects come, they go. They are unpredictable, untethered, uninvited. If we have seen them in a handful of years, how many might have slipped past unnoticed in the long centuries before? The famine of 536 was not simply about hunger. It was about collapse. Empires were not destroyed in battles, but in the slow erosion of life itself. The Byzantine Empire, locked in wars against Persia, found its strength withering. The Sassanid dynasty itself fractured. In Mesoamerica, Teotihuacan, the great city of the gods, was abandoned in fire and silence. In Ireland, entire communities were reduced to nothing more than shallow pits filled with bones. The Maya recorded droughts and shifts that may connect to this global catastrophe. These were not coincidences. They were aftershocks of the same trembling sky. History teaches us that famine does not kill alone. It opens doors. It weakens bodies, lowers defenses. Into that vacuum steps disease. And in the years after 536, the world saw the rise of plague, the Justinian plague, a pandemic that swept from Egypt to Constantinople to Europe, killing millions. One disaster fed the next, as if the darkened skies had summoned a chain of calamities that would not be broken for decades. And here is where philosophy intrudes, uninvited but necessary. What is fragility? We build civilizations upon assumptions, that the sun will shine, that crops will grow, that tomorrow will resemble today. But in 536, those assumptions collapsed. A dimmed sky shattered the rhythm of the seasons, and the world learned how fragile the scaffolding of life truly was. All the palaces, armies, and scriptures meant nothing against a sky that refused to warm the earth. It is easy for us, in the age of electricity and technology, to imagine that we are beyond such fragility, but the truth is more haunting. We remain just as vulnerable. The dimming of 536 is not just a story of the past. It is a mirror held up to us, showing what can happen when forces beyond our control, volcanic or cosmic, reach down and rearrange the fabric of existence. So, we return to the bones, to the graves filled too quickly, to the children whose teeth carry the scars of hunger, to the skeletal remains uncovered centuries later in fields once rich with grain. They are the most honest historians of that year. They do not embellish, do not exaggerate. They simply tell us that the world was not as it should have been, and that humanity paid the price. And still, beneath the silence of their testimony, the question lingers. Was this suffering the echo of Earth itself, convulsing in volcanic fury? Or was it the breath of a visitor from the stars, passing close, leaving only dust and despair in its wake? We may never know. But in the echoes of ash and bone, in the scars written on earth and body alike, we find hints of an answer. The story of 536 is not just the story of a darkened sun. It is the story of humanity's confrontation with forces it could not name. It is the story of the fragility of civilizations. And perhaps, just perhaps, it is the story of a forgotten visitor, its presence carved not in light but in the shadows it left behind. The ancients believed that comets were messengers, fiery scribes etched across the heavens to announce catastrophe. To see one was to feel the heart tighten, for they were thought to bring plague, war, famine, or the death of kings. Their tails stretched like swords across the sky, and their sudden appearances seemed to defy the order of the cosmos. But what if some of these omens were not merely passing comets, bound to the sun, circling back in cycles we could learn to predict? What if some were strangers, true wanderers, bodies that belonged not to our solar system at all, but to the deep cold between stars? What if one of those wanderers brushed against our world in 536, unseen except through the veil it cast across our lives? To understand this possibility, we must step into the vastness of interstellar space. Our solar system is a small island in a dark ocean. Around our sun circle planets, comets, asteroids, familiar bodies bound by gravity, loyal to their parent star. But beyond the reach of our sun's light lies the abyss, an endless scattering of matter adrift without allegiance. Some of these drifters were born around distant stars, thrown outward by violent beginnings, exiled to wander for eternity. Others may be fragments of forgotten systems, survivors of collisions or cosmic upheavals, their paths carrying them far from the stars that birthed them. Every so often, one of these wanderers strays into our system, pulled by the faint tug of the sun, brushing briefly against our orbit before vanishing again into the dark. In our age, we have seen them with our own eyes. In 2017 came Oumuamua, an elongated object that tumbled through our solar system at speeds too great to be bound by our sun. It came from nowhere, entered our skies silently, and then slipped away, never to return. Its shape was strange, its trajectory even stranger. Some scientists speculated it was a comet, others an asteroid. Some even whispered of artificial origins. But whatever it was, it reminded us that our skies are not closed. Visitors come uninvited. They always have. 2 years later, in 2019, another arrived, Borisov, a comet glowing faintly in our telescopes, leaving behind the unmistakable signature of alien ices. Its chemistry was not ours. Its birth was not ours. It had formed in a different cradle, around a distant star, carrying with it the fingerprints of another world. And then came 3/Atlas. Yet another interstellar body, fractured and faint, but proof that these wanderers are not rare. They move through the galaxy endlessly, silent ambassadors of distant systems, and occasionally they pass close enough to be seen. If 3 such visitors have crossed our path in mere years of modern observation, how many must have passed in the centuries before we had telescopes to record them? How many times did they come and go, leaving only whispers in myth and memory? Could the catastrophe of 536 have been the shadow of one such encounter? A visitor from beyond our sun passing so close that Earth was brushed by its dust, its debris, its veil? Picture it. A comet not bound to our sun, but hurtling from the darkness between stars. Its coma blooms as it nears the warmth of our system, a halo of dust spreading vast, delicate, immeasurable. Earth passes through the trail, invisible particles drifting into our upper atmosphere. They scatter sunlight, not enough to bring night, but enough to dim day into something uncanny. The sun remains visible, but it glows weak, pale, as if seen through smoked glass. For 18 months, the Earth lives under a sky that feels sickened, a world dimmed by a cosmic intruder no one can name. How would such an event appear to the people of that time? They had no telescopes, no physics of dust scattering. They would look upward and see a ghostly sun, dimmed and distorted, and they would reach for the only language they had: myth, religion, fear. They would imagine dragons devouring the sun, veils of punishment laid by God, signs that the end of days had arrived. They would not know that the cause might lie not on Earth, not even in the solar system, but in the endless dark between stars. And what would it mean philosophically to know that the fate of civilizations can be altered by bodies that do not belong to our world? Volcanoes we can at least understand. They are of Earth, born of fire beneath our feet. But an interstellar comet carries with it the cold truth that the universe does not revolve around us, that we are not sheltered, that from time to time, visitors we cannot predict, cannot control, pass close enough to cast shadows across our history. There is an unsettling beauty in this, to imagine a body formed around another star, perhaps billions of years ago, wandering through the void for ages, and then, by chance, brushing against our fragile planet at the exact moment when human civilizations were expanding, empires rising, cultures flourishing. It is as though the cosmos itself reminds us that we are never safe, never separate, never beyond its reach. We live in a universe of drift, where strangers can arrive without warning and alter everything. Science tells us that comets shed dust as they approach stars, leaving trails hundreds of millions of kilometers long. These trails persist, lingering in space long after the comet itself has passed. When planets move through them, meteor showers blaze in the sky. But what if the dust is denser, thicker, composed of particles fine enough to remain suspended in the upper atmosphere? Then the effect is no longer spectacle, but catastrophe. Sunlight is scattered, warmth withheld, climates altered, crops fail, hunger spreads, empires crumble, all from dust no larger than grains of smoke. And is this not a profound metaphor for existence itself? That something so small, so seemingly insignificant, can unravel civilizations? That the fate of emperors and armies can hinge on the invisible particles left behind by a wanderer from another star? It is humbling. It is terrifying. It is beautiful. When we consider 536 in this light, the chronicles take on new meaning. Procopius writing of a sun without brightness like the moon. Irish scribes recording years of hunger. Chinese astronomers describing strange skies and dust. These are not the words of poets inventing imagery. They are the testimonies of witnesses staring at a world altered by something beyond their comprehension. Their language was limited, but their fear was real. So we return to the question, was the catastrophe of 536 the mark of Earth's own fury, or the passing shadow of a stranger between the stars? The volcanic hypothesis explains much, but not all. The dimming described in chronicles was too persistent, too uncanny, too universal. To imagine an interstellar body passing close, shedding dust into our skies, provides an explanation that is both terrifying and profoundly human, that our fate is not bound only to this Earth, but to the wider cosmos through which we drift. If it was such a visitor, what became of it? Did it vanish back into interstellar night, leaving us to struggle in its wake? Did it disintegrate near the sun, fragments lost among the millions of other comets? Or is it still out there, wandering far beyond Pluto, carrying with it no memory of the civilizations it once nearly unmade? To the universe, our suffering was nothing. To us, it was everything. That asymmetry is at the heart of our fragility. We are creatures who look up and assign meaning. We saw comets as omens, disasters as punishments, visitors as gods. But perhaps the truth is starker. The universe is indifferent. Its wanderers drift, its dust veils fall, and we must endure them as best we can. And yet, within that indifference, there is also connection. The dust that dimmed the sun in 536, whether volcanic or cosmic, became part of us. It entered our lungs, it marked our bones, it shaped our history. We carry it still, in memory, in myth, in the questions we cannot put down. The stranger between the stars may never return. Or perhaps it will, centuries or millennia hence, once again brushing our fragile world with its shadow. But even if it does not, the lesson remains. We are not alone in the cosmos. We are surrounded by wanderers, unseen but real, moving silently past, sometimes close enough to touch our lives. And in 536, one of them may have left a scar that we still feel today. What do we fear most? The earth beneath us breaking open, or the sky above us falling silent? Volcanoes are loud. They roar with fire, tremors, thunderous clouds of ash. The world shakes. Rivers of molten rock sear the land. Mountains split with fury. And when the ash rises high enough, it can dim the skies, casting regions into a chill twilight. But even in their devastation, volcanoes are earthly. They belong to us. Their fury has an origin we can see, hear, and sometimes flee. Yet the Chronicles of 536 speak of something different. Not eruption, not earthquake, but silence. A dimming sun, a cold veil, no thunder, no fire, just a light that faded as though the heavens themselves had drawn a curtain. Across Byzantium, people looked up and saw a sickly sky. In China, imperial scribes described years of strange yellow dust and dimmed daylight. In the Middle East, scholars wrote of days when the sun seemed pale as the moon. In Ireland, monks recorded famines that lasted unbroken. Everywhere the story is the same. Not noise, but stillness. The kind of stillness that unnerves, because it offers no explanation, no cause, no spectacle, only a sky that refuses to answer. If it had been a single volcano, the noise would have been remembered as clearly as the darkness. Ash would have fallen thick, choking the land. But the records speak instead of veils, of light turned ghost-like, of long, lingering dimness. We find the traces of volcanic eruptions and ice cores. Yes, massive eruptions did occur around this time, but the silence in human testimony hints that they may not tell the whole story. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps earth and sky conspired, one erupting below, the other shadowing above. Or perhaps the silence points us elsewhere, to something that left no roar, no ash, only dust fine enough to hide the sun for months on end. The heavens have always been a theater of awe, but they are not always kind. Ancient astronomers charted eclipses, but they came and went within minutes or hours. Meteors burned for only seconds, but this was different. 18 months of twilight. It is one thing to fear a passing omen. It is another to endure a sky that seems permanently altered. Imagine the dread as weeks became months, and months became a year, and still the sun refused to shine. Would you not believe the world itself was ending? What do we call a sky that dims without sound? In myth, it became the work of gods. Norse legends spoke of wolves chasing and swallowing the sun. In Christian lands, priests warned of divine judgment. In Asia, dragons were imagined wrapping around the light, suffocating it. These were not fanciful metaphors, but the desperate language of people with no other way to explain the inexplicable. When silence falls from above, imagination fills the void. And yet, silence does not mean nothingness. In science, silence is often the loudest clue. The absence of certain signals points us toward explanations hidden beneath the surface. Here, the silence tells us that perhaps no earthly explosion can fully account for the dimming. It tells us to look upward, outward, beyond the horizon of our familiar world. Consider again the possibility of a cosmic intruder, a comet or interstellar wanderer brushing Earth with a veil of dust. Such a body could pass with little sound, no quake, no roar, only a quiet scattering of particles so fine they would linger in the stratosphere for months or years. To those on the ground, it would seem as if the sun itself had grown weak. They would not know the cause. They would not hear a thing. They would only endure the silence. Science today gives us glimpses of how such events unfold. When comets shed dust near stars, the particles drift for immense distances. Some are large enough to become meteors, flaring in the sky, but most are microscopic, floating like invisible smoke. They scatter sunlight, changing the colors of dawn and dusk, painting skies red, yellow, strange. Now imagine Earth drifting into such a trail, not for hours, not for days, but for years. Our world would carry the veil with it, trapped in its atmosphere, scattering the sun's warmth away. What we call 536 might be the memory of such an encounter. But whether volcanic or cosmic, the silence shaped civilizations. For silence starves. Crops failed across continents. Wheat in the Byzantine Empire shriveled. Rice in Asia ripened late or not at all. Barley and oats in northern Europe died in the fields. People starved not because of war, not because of tyranny, but because the sky no longer kept its promise. And as hunger spread, so too did fear. For what hope does a farmer have if even the sun cannot be trusted? Silence also destabilizes. Empires rely on rhythm, harvests to feed armies, trade to sustain cities, festivals to unite the people. When the rhythm breaks, order cracks. In Byzantium, Justinian's dreams of reconquering lost territories faltered as resources dwindled. In Persia, cracks widened into instability. In the Americas, great cities emptied. In Northern Europe, whole generations were marked by hunger. The silence of the heavens became the unraveling of the earth. There is something profoundly human about our response to silence. We cannot endure it without inventing meaning. When the sun dimmed in 536, people did not simply despair. They created stories, rituals, prayers. Silence became filled with dragons, wolves, gods, and demons. It became filled with hope too. Hope that if the right ritual was performed, if the right offering was made, the sun would return to its strength. But no ritual worked. No prayer restored the light. The silence was impenetrable. What strikes us most is how universal this silence was. From Ireland to China, from Byzantium to the Andes, the testimony is the same. The sun dimmed, the sky grew strange, the seasons failed. In an age before global communication, how could so many different peoples describe the same phenomenon unless it was truly global, truly overwhelming? The silence was not local. It was planetary. And yet, silence invites speculation. Even now, we do not fully know the cause. Volcanoes explain much, but not all. Interstellar dust explains some mysteries, but raises others. Perhaps it was both. A volcanic eruption amplified by cosmic dust, a convergence of earth and sky. Perhaps we will never know. The silence has become its own kind of evidence, a reminder that history does not always reveal its secrets, even to science. But maybe that is the point. Maybe the silence is itself the lesson. It teaches us humility. It reminds us that the universe does not owe us answers, and that sometimes the most powerful forces are the ones that arrive quietly. A roar may terrify, but silence endures. A volcano explodes and then subsides, but a silent veil can stretch on, unrelenting, indifferent to our suffering. In the end, what mattered was not the cause, but the consequence. The silence became hunger, hunger became plague, plague became collapse. Empires fell not to swords, but to shadows. And when the sun finally regained its strength, the world that emerged was changed forever. It was leaner, weaker, scarred. Yet, it also carried forward the memory of silence, encoded into myth and chronicle, warning us that the heavens are not immutable. And so, we find ourselves, centuries later, staring at the same sky, still vulnerable to its moods, still dependent on its light. We tell ourselves that science protects us, that we can predict, that we can prepare. But if silence were to fall again, if the sun were to dim, if the sky were to grow pale, would we truly be ready? Or would we, like those before us, reach once more for myth, for fear, for desperate prayers? The silence of 536 was not absence. It was presence, presence of dust, of shadow, of something greater than ourselves. It was the universe reminding us that we are small, fragile, and never beyond its reach. And perhaps, in that silence, we can still hear the echo of a forgotten visitor passing close, leaving behind no roar, no fire, only a veil and the memory of a sun that once fell silent. When the heavens betray us, we write, we carve, we chant, we paint, we preserve. Silence in the sky demanded a response, and so humanity filled the void with words, with symbols, with memory pressed into manuscripts and myth. The dimmed sun of 536 was not only an event to endure, it was a story to record, to encode, to pass down so that generations yet unborn would know the terror of that year. And though centuries blurred the details, though the language of science had not yet been invented, the chronicles remain like shards of broken mirrors, each reflecting the same dim light from different angles. Together, they form a codex of forgotten fire. In the Mediterranean, the Byzantine historian Procopius left words that still chill us. The sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon during the whole year. This was not metaphor. It was testimony. A court historian writing in the midst of Justinian's reign, describing a sky that had turned strange. His record is echoed by Michael the Syrian, who centuries later preserved older chronicles telling of a sign in the sun that lasted for 18 months, robbing the earth of harvests. These words are dry, factual, restrained, and yet beneath them trembles awe and dread. Far away in the annals of Ireland, monks wrote of a failure of bread between 536 and 539. No harvests, no warmth, famine unrelenting. Their brief lines carry the weight of entire villages vanishing. In China, court astronomers, those careful observers whose duty was to record the language of the heavens, described yellow dust falling like strange snow, obscuring the light, darkening the sky. Some chronicles even speak of frost in summer, rivers frozen when they should have flowed. The dragon, symbol of cosmic imbalance, appears again and again in their records, not merely as myth, but as warning. The harmony of heaven and earth had been broken. Norse sagas tell of Fimbulwinter, the great winter before the end of days, when snow would fall without end, when the sun would vanish, when hunger would stalk the world. Scholars debate whether these sagas preserved a memory of the 536 event, crystallized into myth centuries later. Perhaps the tales of wolves devouring the sun, of skies blackened before Ragnarok, were echoes of what ancestors endured when the heavens dimmed. In the Middle East, Syriac chroniclers wrote of a sign from God, of crops failing, of hunger spreading from city to city. In Mesoamerica, temples record abrupt abandonments, fires sweeping through once thriving centers. The Maya left glyphs hinting at droughts, rituals meant to appease gods of sun and rain. The world in every language seemed to agree. The heavens had turned, and with them the fates of empires. But we must pause to ask, what exactly are these texts telling us? Are they religious visions, exaggerated omens, or eyewitness testimony of a cosmic veil? Skeptics may say myth cannot be trusted. But myth is how human beings archive the incomprehensible. When a farmer looks at a sun that refuses to shine, he has no physics to explain scattering of particles. He has dragons. When a monk sees famine spread, he has no climate model. He has the language of divine wrath. And yet, beneath the symbolism lies the truth. They saw something, endured something, survived something so strange that only myth could hold it. Consider the symbolism of fire. Many manuscripts speak of skies that glowed red, of sunsets that bled across the horizon. Chinese chronicles describe blood-colored dawns. European records speak of the sun as bluish, or dim as the moon. To us, these are signs of aerosols scattering light, fine dust high in the atmosphere, refracting the sun's rays into alien hues. But to them, it was fire in the heavens, signs of judgment, omens of apocalypse. And think of the moon. Procopius likened the sun to the moon, pale and ghost-like. Other sources echo this comparison. To people who relied on the sun for warmth, growth, life itself, to see it reduced to the cold glow of the moon was to experience a reversal of the natural order. Day became twilight. Summer became winter. The ordinary rhythm of the cosmos was overturned, and so they wrote desperately to capture the dissonance. The sun as moon, the day as night, the sky as stranger. These records, scattered across continents, form a chorus. They are not identical, yet they resonate. Ireland, Byzantium, China, the Middle East, all speak of famine, of dimmed skies, of a world out of joint. How could so many voices, separated by oceans and mountains, describe the same years in the same way, unless something truly global had occurred? Volcanoes might explain part of it, but the persistence, the silence, the uncanny descriptions of veils and moons hint at more. They hint at dust not of this world. They hint at a cosmic visitor whose trail passed close enough to rewrite history. Myth, then, is not falsehood. It is encryption. It is memory folded into symbol, carried across centuries. A dragon swallowing the sun is not a literal creature. It is the only vocabulary available for an interstellar veil. A wolf chasing the light is not superstition. It is how a people remembered a sky that refused to brighten. When we read these texts today, we must not dismiss them as fantasy, but decode them as messages from those who lived through one of humanity's darkest seasons. Even the silences within the texts matter. In some regions, records vanish altogether, as if the chroniclers themselves perished, or as if famine left no hands strong enough to hold the pen. Absence becomes its own testimony. The blank pages of history may be filled not with forgetfulness, but with graves. And so we gather these fragments, fragile as they are, and stitch them together into a codex that speaks not in the language of science, but in the poetry of survival. It tells us that something happened, something that dimmed the sun, starved the earth, and left scars in memory and myth. Whether volcanic fire or cosmic dust, the result was the same. Humanity learned to fear the silence of the heavens. But there is one more layer. For some cultures, the event was not merely catastrophe, it was initiation. In Norse myth, Fimbulwinter was the prelude to Ragnarok, the cleansing fire from which a new world would emerge. In Christian lands, the dimming was seen as a test of faith, a sign of apocalypse that would precede salvation. In Mayan rituals, droughts and famines were occasions to renew covenants with gods, to reassert humanity's place within cosmic cycles. Out of suffering came meaning, out of silence came story, and those stories became the vessels through which the memory survived. What if, centuries from now, future civilizations look back at our records of Oumuamua or Borisov? Would they see science or myth? Would they say that we, too, clothed the incomprehensible in the language we had available? The ancients wrote of dragons. We write of interstellar comets. Both are attempts to name the stranger that passes through our skies. Both are ways of preserving awe and fear in forms that endure. The Codex of Forgotten Fire, then, is more than a collection of old texts. It is humanity's way of speaking to itself across time. It tells us that we are not the first to look up and feel dread. It reminds us that the cosmos has always been more vast, more mysterious, more dangerous than we admit. And it warns us that visitors can come unannounced, leaving nothing behind but hunger, silence, and the memory of a sun that once dimmed. And so, we turn the page of this codex, knowing that within it lies both warning and wonder. Warning because it tells us that our world can be shaken by forces we cannot predict. Wonder because it shows us that even in our darkest hours, we never cease to record, to imagine, to find meaning. The fire may have been forgotten in detail, but not in spirit. It burns still in words, in myths, in stories carried across continents and centuries, waiting for us to decode. And perhaps in those stories we hear not only echoes of the past, but whispers of the future. For if the visitor came once, it may come again. And when it does, will we write of dragons and wolves? Or will we, too, reach for metaphors, struggling to capture the silence of a sun that grows pale? Empires do not fall in a single night. They fracture slowly like ice under pressure, until one day the crack becomes too wide to ignore. The year 536 was such a fracture, a line carved across continents. It did not come with armies at the gates, nor with kings assassinated in their courts. It came from above, silent, relentless, unyielding. A dimmed sun, a broken rhythm, a harvest denied. And in its shadow, the structures of power, empires, kingdoms, cities, began to buckle. In Constantinople, the jewel of Byzantium, Emperor Justinian dreamed of restoring the Roman Empire. His armies marched west, reclaiming territories, waging wars that stretched the empire's strength. But then, the sky dimmed, the fields failed. Grain grew scarce, and with scarcity came unrest. The cost of war could not be sustained when the very earth refused to yield. Soldiers went hungry, citizens rioted, coffers drained. Justinian's ambitions faltered, not because of a battlefield defeat, but because the sun itself withdrew its promise. And then, as if the famine were not enough, plague arrived. In 541, only a few years after the Great Dimming began, the Justinian plague swept through the empire. Carried by rats and fleas, driven by weakened bodies and desperate migrations, it killed millions. Constantinople itself saw corpses piled in streets, mass graves dug beyond city walls. The empire's strength was broken, not by rival nations, but by hunger and disease unleashed under a pallid sky. The dimming had opened the door, and through it, disaster poured. To the east, the Sassanid Persian Empire faced its own unraveling. Long the rival of Byzantium, it too was weakened by failed harvests, shifting climates, instability in its provinces. Wars drained its strength, but famine drained it further. Crops failed along the Tigris and Euphrates, the breadbasket of an empire. Kingship became fragile. Authority faltered. When both Persia and Byzantium staggered under the same dimmed sky, the balance of power in the region shifted, paving the way for new forces to rise in centuries to come. In the far north, across Scandinavia, archaeologists uncover evidence of entire villages abandoned around this time. Fields were deserted, halls fell silent, longhouses collapsed into ruin. The soil shows signs of failed crops. The sagas that would later speak of Fimbulwinter may have preserved these memories. Years when the sun dimmed, when the winter lengthened, when hunger forced migrations. Scandinavia's societies were reshaped, their stories darkened, their myths infused with the memory of a sun that betrayed them. Across the Atlantic, in Mesoamerica, the great city of Teotihuacan was in decline. By the mid-6th century, fire swept through its temples, neighborhoods collapsed, and the once mighty metropolis was abandoned. The causes remained debated, but climate change, linked to the dimming skies, was a factor. Crops failed in the valleys, trade faltered, cities emptied. The Americas, too, felt the fracture of 536. The silence of the sun reached across oceans, indifferent to borders or empires. And in the green fields of Ireland, famine left its mark. Chronicles describe years without bread, and archaeology confirms mass burials from this period. Skeletal remains show the marks of malnutrition, of children who did not grow to adulthood. Communities shrank, villages disappeared. The famine was not a brief disaster, but a slow grinding away of life, year after year. This is the truth of the dimming sky. It did not destroy with a single blow, but with attrition. Empires are strong against armies, but weak against hunger. Thrones are secure against assassins, but fragile when the fields are empty. In 536, the world learned that no amount of power could command the sun to shine. The emperor and the peasant suffered alike. Philosophically, this moment reveals something profound about human civilization. We build structures of law, culture, economy, believing them unshakable. Yet, beneath them lies a foundation of soil, harvest, light. When the light falters, everything else cracks. Civilization is not a fortress. It is a fragile web strung beneath the sky. And when the sky trembles, the web tears. We see this not only in historical records, but in archaeology. Tree rings from Scandinavia show a sudden halt in growth, a sign of cold summers, shortened seasons. Ice cores reveal layers of dust and ash, marking years of atmospheric veil. Soil samples from across Europe show shifts in pollen, evidence of crops abandoned, and forests reclaiming farmland. Even coins minted during these years shrink in size, reflecting economies under strain. The sky dimmed, and the very fabric of societies unraveled. And yet, amid collapse, there was adaptation. In some regions, new centers of power emerged. Smaller kingdoms rose from the ashes of great empires. Peoples migrated, reshaping the map. In Scandinavia, hunger may have driven expansion, the restless push outward that would centuries later birth the Viking Age. In the Middle East, the weakening of Byzantium and Persia created a vacuum into which new faiths, new powers would rise. Collapse and creation walked hand in hand, born from the same dimmed sky. But what if this collapse was not merely Earth's own doing? What if the fracture of civilizations was triggered by something passing, something cosmic, something not of this world? The silence of the heavens, the dimming sun, the famine that followed, these may all have been echoes of a forgotten visitor, brushing past, indifferent to the havoc left in its wake. Imagine an interstellar comet passing near, scattering dust into Earth's skies. For the comet, it was nothing. For humanity, it was everything. This asymmetry, the indifference of the universe to human fate, is at once terrifying and humbling. Civilizations rose and fell because of forces they could not see, could not predict, could not name. They built temples to gods, armies to fight rivals, but none of it shielded them from a sun that dimmed for 18 months. To live in that age was to learn, brutally, that we are not masters of the world but tenants, subject to powers greater than ourselves. And is it not the same today? We build global economies, vast technologies, digital empires, yet all of it still rests on the same fragile foundation: sunlight, warmth, harvest. If a visitor from the stars were to veil our sky again, how quickly would our towers of glass and steel falter? The lesson of 536 is not confined to the past. It is a warning written into the bones of history. Empires cracked under that dimming sky. Byzantium staggered, Persia weakened, Teotihuacan fell. Villages vanished, myths were born, all from a veil drawn across the heavens, whether by volcano or visitor. The silence of the sun became the silence of empires, and from that silence, new worlds would emerge. But we must ask, did those who survived know what they had endured? Did they sense that the cause was greater than famine, greater than winter, greater than the wrath of gods? Did they feel, even dimly, that a stranger had passed close, leaving only dust and despair in its wake? Or did they carry on, blind to the cosmic scale of their suffering, seeing only hunger and death? History gives no answer, but it leaves us with fragments, chronicles, myths, bones, that whisper of a time when the sky itself conspired against humanity, a time when heaven fell silent and empires cracked beneath its weight. For centuries, the story of 536 lingered in chronicles and myths, a mystery without clear cause. Volcanoes offered one answer, silence another. But as our own age began to peer deeper into the cosmos, we discovered something that the ancients could not have imagined, that we are not alone in the paths that weave through our solar system. Wanderers come, strangers pass, bodies born in alien systems brush near our sun, unbound, uninvited, indifferent. And when we watch them slip past, we realize a chilling truth. The shadow that dimmed the world in 536 could have been such a visitor. The first of these revelations came in 2017. Astronomers scanning the skies detected something unusual, an object racing through the inner solar system on a trajectory unlike anything seen before. It came from no known orbit, moved too fast to be bound by our sun. Oumuamua, they named it, Hawaiian for scout or messenger from afar. It tumbled end over end, elongated like a shard, reflecting light in ways that baffled instruments. And stranger still, as it moved away from the sun, it seemed to accelerate, as though pushed by something invisible. Was it outgassing like a comet, shedding jets of gas? Or was it something else, something we had no language for? Oumuamua was gone within weeks, vanishing back into the dark, leaving behind only questions. Some scientists called it a comet, others an asteroid. A few dared to wonder if it was artificial, a fragment of alien technology adrift in the stars. But whatever it was undeniable. A visitor from beyond had crossed our path. For the first time, we had proof that interstellar objects pass through our system, silent and unpredictable. Only 2 years later, in 2019, another arrived. This one was unmistakable, a comet, complete with a glowing coma and a tail streaming behind it. Discovered by amateur astronomer Gennady Borisov, it was named 2I/Borisov, the second interstellar visitor ever confirmed. Its chemistry was strange, its ices alien, formed in the cradle of a distant star system. Here was proof again that the galaxy is filled with such wanderers, fragments of other worlds drifting endlessly. And then, in 2020, came 3I/Atlas, the third. It fractured as it approached, breaking into pieces, but its presence was unmistakable. 3 interstellar visitors in just a handful of years. What once seemed unthinkable, that bodies from other stars pass through our skies, became inevitable. They come. They have always come. And if they come now, how many must have passed unseen in the centuries before? Think of this in light of 536. The chronicles describe a sun dimmed, a veil that lingered. Could it have been dust from one such visitor? A trail Earth blundered into as it orbited the sun? The particles of an interstellar body are unimaginably fine, small enough to remain suspended, scattering sunlight, transforming day into twilight. To the people of that age, it would have seemed as though the sun itself had weakened. They could not know that the cause might lie in a body not even born of our system, a stranger whose very existence would not be imagined until 15 centuries later. The science of interstellar objects is still young, but already it unsettles us. Oumuamua did not behave as expected. Its acceleration was subtle, unexplained. Some suggest it was pushed by sunlight reflecting off an unusually thin shape, perhaps like a sheet or sail. Others argue for outgassing too faint to detect. But the unease remains. Here was something we could not fully categorize. Borisov and Atlas, though more comet-like, carried signatures that set them apart, reminders that they were not ours, not kin to the countless comets of our own solar system. To imagine one of their ancestors passing in 536 is to reframe the catastrophe. The famine, the plague, the collapse, these were not simply products of Earth's own rage. They were gifts or curses of the galaxy itself, delivered by a visitor that came and went without knowing what it had wrought. The asymmetry is profound. To the object, Earth was nothing more than a stone in its path. To humanity, it was apocalypse. Philosophically, what does it mean that our fate can be rewritten by wanderers from other stars? It means we are not an isolated system, a self-contained world. We are threads in a wider tapestry, vulnerable to the drift of strangers who owe us nothing. Our myths of dragons, of veiled suns, of apocalyptic winters, perhaps they are not fantasies, but ways of grappling with the intrusion of the outside into our fragile order. And here is the unsettling question. If 3 such objects have been seen in just a few years, how often do they pass when we are not looking? Our telescopes scan only a fraction of the sky. For most of history, we had no instruments at all. How many times did strangers come and go, unseen except for the shadows they cast on human lives? How many myths are footnotes to their passages? How many collapses, unexplained famines, strange winters can be traced back to wanderers we will never know? There is a temptation to imagine these visitors as omens, as messengers with purpose. But perhaps the truth is more terrifying. They are indifferent. They do not come to teach, to punish, to warn. They come because gravity and chance guide them, because the galaxy is filled with debris, because exile is the fate of many worlds. They come without intention, and yet their presence reshapes us. We are left to interpret, to build myths, to seek meaning in their shadows. And yet, there is beauty here too. Each visitor is a story carried across the abyss. Borisov's ices told of chemistry in a distant star system. Oumuamua's strange form hinted at forces we do not yet understand. 3. I/Atlas fractured like a fragile memory breaking apart. They are relics of other cradles, carrying whispers of alien skies. To glimpse them is to realize that the galaxy is alive with movement, that the space between stars is not empty, but full of travelers. So, when we think of 536, we must think not only of volcanoes and famine, but of possibility. That perhaps the dimming of the sun was the brush of such a visitor, a reminder that Earth is not alone, that our history is not written only by ourselves. Perhaps our darkest year was the footprint of a stranger passing through, unnoticed except for the shadow it left behind. In our age, we watch these wanderers with instruments and theories. In theirs, they watched with naked eyes and wrote of dragons. The difference is not as great as we might believe. Both are attempts to make sense of the incomprehensible. Both are ways of saying, something passed, something changed us, something came close. And if it happened once, it will happen again. The galaxy is restless. Visitors come and go, and one day, perhaps sooner than we think, another will arrive, larger, closer, more dangerous. And when it does, will we have the wisdom to recognize it? Or will we, like those before us, watch the sun dim and wonder why the heavens have grown silent? Civilizations do not remember only with words. They remember with stone, with ritual, with myth etched into the fabric of culture. When the sun dimmed in 536, when silence and famine spread across continents, the response was not confined to chronicles written in ink. It was also carried into sagas, into carvings, into symbols repeated for generations. A world that had been shaken sought permanence, something to hold the memory of its terror long after the famine had passed. And so, the sky's betrayal was recorded not only in manuscripts, but in myths that would outlive their creators. Look to the Norse sagas. They tell of Fimbulwinter, a great winter without end, snow upon snow, cold upon cold, leading to Ragnarok, the death of gods, and the rebirth of the world. Scholars see in this myth the echo of a real event, an ancestral memory of years when the sun failed. Could the endless winter described in myth be the cultural residue of 536, passed down through centuries of storytelling until it was woven into the great narrative of cosmic death and renewal? Wolves devouring the sun, dragons blotting out the light. These are not random images, but poetic translations of a sky that dimmed without explanation. In the Middle East, Syriac texts spoke of a sign from God in the sun, and in later centuries, Islamic scholars preserved traditions of veiled suns, red skies, and portents of judgment. The cosmic silence became folded into theology, an omen that carried spiritual weight long after the dust had dispersed. Myths of apocalypse were not invented in isolation. They were responses to skies that once seemed apocalyptic in truth. Consider also the art of Mesoamerica. In temples abandoned or burned, archaeologists find carvings of suns darkened, of gods demanding sacrifice to restore cosmic balance. Among the Maya, myths of cyclical suns and repeating worlds hint at a memory of disruption, of a time when the Great Order faltered. The gods themselves were imagined to have withdrawn their favor, withholding warmth until appeased. Perhaps these were not abstract stories, but interpretations of famine and collapse triggered by a dimmed sky. And in China, the dragon, long the symbol of cosmic balance, appears in records of eclipses, of dimmed skies, of omens of disaster. The chronicles of 536 spoke of yellow dust, strange frosts, and failing harvests. Later, myths of dragons swallowing the sun preserved this imagery, embedding it into ritual. Even today, the dragon dance during eclipses is an echo of ancient fear, the attempt to frighten away the creature imagined to devour the light. Myths became a way to fight back against silence, to assert that humanity still had a role to play, even if symbolic. Stone itself carries memory. Across Europe, monuments aligned with the sun and moon stand as testaments to ancient obsessions with the sky. When the sun dimmed in 536, those who lived within cultures already attuned to celestial rhythms must have been shaken to their core. Imagine a society that built its temples to track solstices, equinoxes, the reliable dance of light. And then imagine those temples standing beneath a sun that no longer obeyed. The stone alignments still pointed true, but the light that should have poured through them was pale, cold, diminished. The silence of heaven was not just physical, it was cultural dissonance, the breaking of a sacred contract. This is why myth became essential. To live in that dissonance without explanation would have been unbearable. Myth restored coherence, even if through terror. If dragons swallowed the sun, then rituals could drive them away. If gods had veiled the light, then sacrifice might appease them. If wolves chased the sun, then heroes might one day defeat them. The myth did not end the famine, but it gave people a story larger than their hunger, a meaning that outlived the silence. Philosophically, this reveals something profound about humanity. When faced with incomprehensible forces, we do not remain silent. We encode. We create symbols, stories, alignments, rituals. We may not understand, but we refuse to forget. The year 536 was not remembered only as a sequence of failed harvests. It was remembered as cosmic betrayal, and betrayal demands myth. Even today, when we read of Fimbulwinter, of dragons, of veiled suns in religious texts, we are hearing echoes of that betrayal. The myth survives because the terror was real, and perhaps myths are more accurate than we think, not literal, but truthful in essence. A dragon is a metaphor, but it is also a memory of a sky gone dark. A saga of endless winter is a story, but it is also a warning that such winters truly come, And here lies a haunting question. If myths can encode cosmic events, what else have they preserved? Are there other tales, dismissed as fantasy, that carry within them the residue of forgotten visitors? If interstellar wanderers have passed before, leaving only dust and famine, might they be remembered not in chronicles, but in epics, in symbols carved on temple walls, in rituals whose origins are lost? The Codex of Forgotten Fire we read in Segment 5 was composed of manuscripts, but here, in Segment 8, we see its parallel codex, one written not in ink, but in stone and story. It stretches from the sagas of the North to the glyphs of Mesoamerica, from Chinese dragons to Middle Eastern prophecies. A global language of myth, each piece pointing to a shared memory. The sky dimmed, and humanity sought to explain it. And perhaps that is the greatest warning, for myths are not idle. They persist because they are rooted in experience. They remind us that the silence of the heavens is not unique, not impossible, not confined to the past. It happened once, it will happen again. And when it does, we too will search for symbols, for stories, for myths to carry the memory forward. The stranger between the stars leaves no monument of its own. It passes silently, scattering dust, indifferent to the havoc it causes. But humanity cannot accept silence. We carve meaning where none exists. We turn catastrophe into saga, hunger into legend, silence into symbol. In doing so, we build continuity. We become the custodians of memory, guardians of warnings we may not fully understand. So the question becomes, are we listening? When we read of wolves chasing the sun, of dragons devouring light, of endless winters and failing harvests, do we dismiss them as fantasy, or do we recognize them as messages left for us by those who survived the last dimming? Do we see them as entertainment, or as encrypted warnings of what happens when the cosmos intrudes? The stones still stand. The myths still speak. And if we decode them rightly, they may tell us not only of the past, but of the future. For the visitor that came once may come again, and when it does, the sky may once more grow pale, and humanity will once more reach for story to endure the silence. History is not a straight line. It bends, it echoes, it repeats. When we look closely, the past does not simply recede, it circles back, as though reminding us of lessons we failed to learn. The year 536 was one such lesson, carved into memory by famine, plague, and silence. But was it unique? Or is it part of a pattern, a rhythm of darkness that recurs, sometimes through volcanoes, sometimes through cosmic visitors, sometimes through forces we cannot yet name? Tree rings and ice cores whisper of other years when the sky dimmed. 1600 BC, perhaps linked to the eruption of Thera, when Minoan civilization faltered. 1177 BC, the so-called Bronze Age collapse, when drought and famine toppled empires in the Mediterranean. 1816 AD, the year without a summer, when Mount Tambora darkened skies and frost killed crops in June. And then, again and again, scattered across centuries, moments when the rhythm of light and harvest broke. If we map them, they do not fall evenly, but they cluster. They form patterns like echoes reverberating through time, and within those patterns lurks a question. Are they purely geological, the breathing of Earth's molten heart through volcanic fire? Or are some of them celestial, footprints of wanderers who pass unseen, leaving behind veils of dust? We know now that interstellar objects arrive. Oumuamua, Borisov, Atlas, each proof that the galaxy drifts through us. If 3 in a handful of years, how many in the unrecorded centuries? Could some of the echoes in ice and myth be scars from such encounters? Consider how civilizations respond. The Bronze Age collapsed scattered cities, broke empires, left behind mythologies of storms and famines. The Norse preserved Fimbulwinter, endless snow before apocalypse. In China, dynasties rose and fell under omens of heaven's displeasure, many timed with famines and strange skies. In the 19th century, Tambora's eruption plunged the world into cold, birthing not only famine, but stories of darkness. The darkness at noon that inspired poets and prophets. Again and again, humanity encodes the same memory. The light failed, and with it, our world shook. Patterns need not be precise to be powerful. They are not clocks but rhythms, beats that pulse unpredictably yet persistently. To see them is to feel dread, for they suggest recurrence. If the sky dimmed before, it can dim again. If famine once reshaped the world, it can return. If visitors once brushed past, they may circle back on orbit so vast that millennia pass before they reappear. What seems unique may in fact be cyclical. Philosophy teaches us to ask, what is the meaning of repetition? If disasters come again and again, do they exist to teach us, or are they simply the indifferent habits of a universe that does not care? In myth, repetition is always a test. The same trial comes until the lesson is learned. In science, repetition is data, a signal that something larger is at work. For humanity, repetition is both, a warning that we are fragile and a call to remember. The visitor of 536, if indeed it was interstellar, may not have been the first, nor will it be the last. Its dust veil may have been only one ripple in a wider cycle, a cycle we glimpse only dimly through the fog of time. Perhaps every 1,000 years, or every few centuries, a wanderer's path intersects ours. Most pass harmlessly, unseen, but sometimes their dust lingers, and when it does, the world changes. Even the plagues that follow often echo one another. The famine of 536 opened the door to the Justinian plague. The famine after Tambora in 1816 paved the way for cholera pandemics. Hunger weakens the body, disease exploits the weakness. Collapse comes not from a single cause, but from a sequence, a pattern of calamities chained together. And when we look back, we see that chain repeating. Darkness, hunger, plague, collapse, again and again. And yet, we resist the idea of cycles. We prefer to believe in progress, in linear ascent, in mastery over nature. But the records remind us that we are not outside of history's rhythms. We are inside them, subject to their recurrence. The myths of endless winters, of devoured suns, of apocalyptic cycles are not fantasies, but acknowledgments. They tell us what we prefer not to admit, that the universe has patterns, and we are caught within them. Imagine, then, that we live not in a stable world, but in a cosmos whose rhythm includes catastrophe. Imagine that our flourishing is always temporary, always between cycles of silence. How different would we live if we truly believed that? Would we prepare differently, build differently, think differently? Or would we, as always, push it aside until the rhythm returns? In ice and myth, in bones and chronicles, the pattern speaks. It does not say when the next silence will fall. It does not reveal whether it will be volcanic, cosmic, or something stranger still. But it tells us enough that it will happen, that the sun will dim again, that humanity will be tested once more. The question is not whether the pattern exists, but whether we will listen. Will we see the stranger in the stars as part of that rhythm, a recurring visitor whose shadow falls across our story? Or will we dismiss the echoes as coincidence until the silence comes again and we are caught unprepared? History does not repeat exactly, but it rhymes. And the rhyme we hear in 536, in Tambora, in the Bronze Age, in myths of endless winter, is unmistakable. The rhyme is silence. The rhyme is hunger. The rhyme is collapse. And perhaps, beneath all of them, the rhyme is the shadow of forgotten visitors. We arrive again at the year 536, a year when the sun dimmed, when famine spread, when civilizations faltered. We have traced it through chronicles, bones, myths, stones, and science. We have seen how empires cracked beneath a sky that no longer obeyed. We have imagined the possibility that a forgotten visitor, an interstellar wanderer, brushed against our world, leaving dust that veiled the sun. And now, at the end of this long journey, we must ask, what does it mean? The answer is not only about the past, it is about who we are and who we might become. For if history teaches anything, it is that we are fragile. Our civilizations rise on the assumption of stability, that the sun will shine, that harvests will follow, that the seasons will obey. In 536, those assumptions shattered. The people of that age saw their gods betray them, their kings fail them, their empires weaken. And though centuries have passed, we remain no less vulnerable. Our technology glitters, our towers rise higher, our networks spread wider, but still we depend on the thin veil of atmosphere, on the daily rising of the sun, on a balance we cannot command. What if the visitor returns? Not metaphorically, not in myth, but in truth. What if another interstellar body passes close, scattering dust into our skies, dimming the sun for months or years? Would we be better prepared than they were in 536? Or would we too stumble into famine, panic, collapse? We like to imagine our satellites and sensors would give us warning, but would that warning change the fact that no human hand can stop the drift of a wanderer from the stars? There is a humility demanded here. The cosmos is not our possession. We are tenants, fragile guests in a universe that pays us little mind. The silence of 536 was not a punishment, not a message. It was indifference. Whether volcanic or cosmic, it was a reminder that we live at the mercy of forces greater than us. And yet, in our fragility, there is also strength. For though famine hollowed faces, though plague filled graves, though empires cracked, humanity endured. We endured because we remember, because we tell stories, because we refuse to let silence erase us. Look again at the myths: wolves devouring the sun, dragons swallowing light, prophecies of endless winter. These are not failures of understanding. They are triumphs of memory. The people of 536 did not know of comets, of scattering particles, of interstellar visitors, but they knew that the sun dimmed, that hunger followed, that silence fell. And they preserved that knowledge in the only language they had. They left us a warning disguised as myth. Now we stand in their place, armed with science and satellites, yet still facing the same cosmos. We name the wanderers Oumuamua, Borisov, Atlas. We study their paths, their chemistry, their mysteries. We debate whether they are natural or artificial, comet or shard, messenger or fragment. But beneath the debates lies the same awe, the same fear, the same recognition. Strangers pass. They have always passed. They will pass again. And when they do, they may alter our world as profoundly as they did in 536. And so, the forgotten visitor is not only a figure of the past. It is a presence that lingers, a shadow that may yet return. Its dust may still drift in the void. Its orbit, if it had one, may circle back after centuries. Or perhaps another, unrelated, will follow in its place. The point is not certainty, but inevitability. Visitors will come, silence will fall. The question is when, not if. Philosophy asks us to consider our place in this vastness. If the sun can dim for 18 months, if civilizations can fall to dust, scattered from the tail of a wanderer, what then are we? We are small, but we are also the ones who notice, who remember, who tell the story. We are the fragile creatures who turn famine into myth, silence into saga, visitors into meaning. The universe may be indifferent, but we are not. And here lies the final reflection. Perhaps meaning itself is our defense. Not against famine, not against dust, but against despair. To look at a dimmed sun and see only chaos is to surrender. To look at it and weave myth, science, story, that is to endure. That is to say, even if the visitor comes again, even if the silence falls once more, humanity will not be erased. We will speak of it. We will remember. We will leave behind a codex, a myth, a record for those who follow. So when you look at the sky tonight, remember 536. Remember that the sun is not guaranteed. Remember that wanderers move even now, unseen, through the dark between stars. Remember that fragility is not weakness, but truth. And ask yourself, if the visitor returns, will we recognize it? Or will we, like those before us, tell stories of wolves and dragons, finding in myth the only way to carry the silence forward? Perhaps the visitor was real, perhaps it was not. But the scars in history remain, carved in famine, in collapse, in myth. The forgotten visitor may never reveal itself, but its shadow lingers, reminding us of the thin line between light and darkness, between flourishing and collapse. And as we close this journey, let us leave with one thought. The sun that shines today, bright and unwavering, is not eternal. It can dim. It has dimmed. And when it does again, as it surely will, whether by earth's fire or by the passing shadow of a stranger, we will once more face the silence. And in that silence, we will discover who we truly are.